So let's get started. We wanted to show some of the things that beginners often miss when they're first learning Gurobi. We have a lot of assets on the website and other places that I frequently see customers missing out on, and this presentation is here to help you find those assets. And I'm going to present it sort of in the order I would follow if I were trying to learn Gurobi for the first time. So there will be a lot of links presented, a lot of web pages and other assets that are linked by a URL. We'll provide the slides after the presentation. I'm not sure how soon after, but I think it's safe for you don't have to copy these URLs as we go along. It'll become something we distribute to you afterward, but it'll be sort of like a menu for you to follow later. We'll talk about how to get Gurobi running on your computer. We'll talk about the main documentation that I think is important when you're trying to use Gurobi. Then we'll look at sample models, and lastly, we'll focus on performance. So I'll go through the slide briefly, and then I'll show you these things in a web page or wherever they are. So first we have getting Gurobi running. The place to start for that is called the Quick Start, and I'll show you that web page, and it's really the best place to start. Worth reading. You could read all day long, of course, so it's nice to have, I think, a little guide about which pages are critical. Then you'll as part of that Quick Start, it'll tell you to download Gurobi. It'll tell you where and how to install it and how to install your license, and then what to do with the Gurobi programs after you've started. I'm going to show you all of that now in a quick demonstration. So let's go to getting started. So let me show you how I got here. I don't think it helps for you to just see the page. From the main page, whoops, a little too narrow. There we go. The resources and documentation link. There's a getting started link. I'm recommending that you skip that if you're trying to save time and come to the documentation page and look for the quick start guides in the first or in the upper left corner, and we'll go there. Then you pick your operating system. I'm going to demonstrate for Linux today because it's a little more complex than the other two operating systems they install, and it's the most common one, I think. I don't know, I think it is the most common one among our customers. So it guides you through how to get set up. I'll show you that, but each of these links is useful at the top here. Well, I'll show you now. Then there's also a section that's language specific. These are critical. So if you want to use R, for example, there are installation instructions for R and a little tutorial on how to get started using Gurobi in R. Now let's walk through the installation. So first we have to download Gurobi. So I'll go to downloads and licenses. First, notice that I'm logged in as myself actually, but you have to have a web account. And if you've been assigned a license, they've told you that, and the license will be associated with the email address that you've submitted for the evaluation. And that same email address will be your login for the web account. So here we have Gurobi Optimizer download software. I'll go there. There will be a license agreement I must accept each time I come in here. I've read it, but I recommend strongly that you read it yourselves. And then here's the download. I can click that and download it, but I actually already have it. So let's go to my session here. I have a Linux session right here, and I've downloaded this tar file. It's in my local directory, but I would just extract it at this point. I won't do it because I've already extracted it, and it created a directory called Gurobi 811. So then I'll move that directory. I like to keep it in /opt. So I would do this command, sudo mv Gurobi 811/opt. The other two installers, by the way, they're graphical. They'll guide you through this process. But for Linux, it's command line. So I would move that Gurobi 811 directory to /opt. I already have it there. And then I'll just show it to you, ls. So I have Gurobi 8.11. I have some old versions, other things here that I use for experiments, but that's the current version. And so it's installed now, but on Windows and Mac at this point, having installed it, I wouldn't have to do anything. The environment variables that are needed are already set up. But for Linux, I need to set some environment variables. So we'll go back to the slides here for a moment to cover those. There are three: Gurobi home, and then path, and then LD library path. Those are the three that I need, but I always use a version variable so that it's really easy for me to switch versions. If we come out with a version 9, I'll be able to put a 9 there instead of 8.11, and then everything else will include that, and it'll all just work. Okay, that's the idea. So I've already got my environment variable set up. So the next thing I want to do is just test it. And I like to use Gurobi.sh. There are a couple of ways to test it, but I'll just use that. And here I get a Gurobi prompt, so I know the license is working. If it didn't work, I would get an error message here. And let's say I did have an error message. Let's say it wasn't working. The trick, the one best thing to do at that point would be to use Gurobi CL --license. Now this is all in well, not all of it. The -- license isn't, but that'll tell me where my license is on the computer. Sometimes it's confusing if you've installed the license maybe in multiple places. You're not sure which one is being invoked by Gurobi. So this is the first step of diagnosing the problem. And then I could look at this file and see if it's the one I thought I was using. So those are the two actually those are the two most commonly used binaries that you'll use with Gurobi. Gurobi CL is a way to do command line solves. I have this file in my local directory, so I can solve it just with the command line. Sometimes that's useful when you're doing performance tuning, that sort of thing. It's a very fast way to run your problem a bunch of times, maybe with different parameters. The third one is GRB tune, and we'll talk about that in the performance section. And on that slide, I also mentioned the API specific installation instructions. So don't miss out on those. Oh, also I did miss on the right here, I'm showing, oops, sorry, installation directories. Gurobi home specifies usually on Linux and Mac some parent directory, then Gurobi version number, and then Linux 64 or Mac 64. On Windows, it's C Gurobi Windows 64. Within that, then you'll see these lists of files, pretty much the same for each operating system. All right, now you've got Gurobi running, so what are your first steps? What should you do next? The first thing is to learn how to do modeling. This is a tough task if you're new to it. I think it's tough. Some people don't. But it's declarative sort of programming, very different from the procedural programming many of us are used to. And so this is an important first step. If you're new to math programming, then we have some links here that I'll show you to web pages, I think, that are worth reading, books that you might want to read, and then some introductory modeling videos that I think are really top-notch, good quality videos if you like that format for learning. And then we'll go through the reference documents. So whether you're new or not to modeling, of course, you'll need to know the API details as you use the language. And I clicked again by mistake. So let's look at that. So from the Gurobi website, I'll go to the reference, first thing was, oh yes, resources. We're going to talk about, oops, wrong menu. From the main resources, we'll talk about modeling basics. Modeling basics, here it is. This is a good section of the documentation, worth reading. It's a bit long, but if you're new to modeling, there are really some new ways of thinking. For most people, it's declarative. So it's a different kind of programming and different considerations when you're preparing to write a model. If you're new to it, I recommend this web page. It'll save you a lot of pain later. And then we do have some books that we recommend. Sort of the main book for using any solver in math programming is Model Building in Mathematical Programming. This may not be so much for beginners. It's a dense read, but we do recommend it as sort of the one-stop book for for learning about the basics of modeling any particular kind of problem. Many industry-specific models in here, and it's intended to be a really complete collection of all the modeling techniques you might need, and it's in its 5th edition. So then we have some videos that we can recommend, that I can strongly recommend, actually. This is one of the main reasons I wrote this presentation. I wanted to make sure you were aware of these videos. So let's look at Python. So I came to the videos and seminars section, and I'll just do a page search for Python. It's near the top anyway. And the first one is called Introduction to Modeling with Python, Python 1. And this is a great video. It's a long one. It's about an hour. But if you like video format rather than reading or in addition to, then I recommend this one very highly. And this and Python 2 are both well worth your time. There's a third one that's a little more advanced. Maybe I could call it optional, but also worth watching, Python 3. So those 3 videos are all worth your time, I believe. So if you're not new to modeling, by the way, those videos are obviously Python based. I'm addressing Python more than other languages because most of you will, if history repeats itself, will be using Python when you work with Gurobi. So the same kinds of things are available in other languages except the videos. I don't think you'll see as many videos on other languages. The samples can help you there, and I'll show you that. Actually, there is one thing. Let me back up. I just had a thought. So these API specific instructions go beyond just installation. For the other languages, for all the languages, they include a tutorial on how to use Gurobi with that language. So remember, that's near the bottom of the quick start page. There's one link for each language. So I'd say even if you're in Python and you want to use the videos, those are still worth doing. Right, so now let's talk about the reference documentation. So we'll talk about where the reference documentation is, how to set the API filter. We'll talk about the most important page, which is the API details page, and then 2 others that I think are important. So let's browse through those. I'll go from the top again. Let's go to the home page. So under resources, there's documentation, and within that I could click reference. There's also documentation here. I can get there that way. There are dozens of ways to get there. Once there's a reference manual link in the upper right. So we'll go there. Now I'm at the top level of the reference documentation. And you'll see this filter dialog at the upper left. It's worth paying attention to. So we'll go through it looking at Python, but you can see as I choose other languages, they appear in this menu, the table of contents menu. And this is a great way to filter that. You don't want to look at MATLAB and .NET if you're working in Python. So we'll just filter those out. So then the most important page is the API details page. I bookmark this and I use it every day. And so for each API, whether it's Python or C or .NET, we have a list of all the classes or objects and functions in the library. And so for Python, they are grouped by classes. We have some global functions. The model class has the most functions to it, as you can see. I'm going to scroll through this. I don't want to make anybody dizzy, but this is give you a sense of how much is here. What I hope to show you, what I hope you'll see, is it's not that long, actually. It's a fairly concise API. That's true of all our languages. And that's because Gurobi tries to avoid cluttering the API with a new function for every feature. There are lots of features in Gurobi you can turn on and off or increase or decrease. So instead of APIs, we use another method of getting at those, and that is parameters and attributes. So if you look at the left here, parameters and attributes are two choices on the main menu. Let me show you. Before I go there, I can set a parameter with a method, global method, set param, makes it global, or I can do the same thing on a model. So let's look at that, set param. The simple way is just to always set these on the model. If I set a parameter, I have to pass it a name and a value. So let's look at a parameter example. There are lots of parameters here. Let's randomly choose, well, I'll just choose the first one. And I get a description of that parameter. It gives me its name at the top. And the default, if I don't set it, and the range of possible values. So each of these parameters is a way to control Gurobi, and most of them are focused on algorithmic settings, telling Gurobi to do something less or more or not at all. And others are more global than that, timeouts, that sort of thing. This page has them listed by categories, mostly grouped by algorithm, but here's one for tuning. That's not an algorithm, it's a different sort of tool. I'll show you more about tuning later. But anyway, this gives you a sense of how many there are. There are a lot of these. And a similar idea are attributes. Let's go back to the main page of the API details. Oops, I got too far. The main menu, rather. So here's attributes. This is the same idea as parameters, but these are applied to specific objects. So many attributes apply to the model. For example, I might get the objective value from a solution. That belongs to the model. So that's an attribute of the model. After the solution or optimization has occurred, we can query that. Other kinds of attributes can be set. We can set a constraint to be a lazy constraint, for example. And there's an equally vast selection of attributes. They're object specific though. So we have a model, we have variables, constraints, different kinds of constraints. We'll look at one just for fun. And it's much the same pattern as for parameters. But as I said, more context specific than a parameter. Parameters tend to be more global. All right, so that's parameters and attributes. And I think it's real important to understand that you'll be using those every day when you're working with Gurobi. Then, okay, so now we've got the documentation sort of well in hand. And I think you're probably an hour, if you haven't watched all the videos, you're an hour into it. With the videos, maybe 3 hours now. So your next step would be to look at the support portal. You might not use it today, but I think you're really going to want this sort of in your quiver of tools for working with Gurobi. So let's have a look at that. We have a knowledge base, which I'll show you, a community, which is like a Google group. In fact, ours replaces the old Gurobi Google group, the news group. And you can submit a ticket there. So let's talk about that. So again, I'll go to the main page for Gurobi, and we have to jump to support. We'll wait till it gets there. So support here is a support portal link. That's what I'm encouraging you to go to. And there are three main sections to pay attention to here. First, I'll take the easiest one to describe, and for commercial customers, this is an important one. You can submit a request here. Even if you don't have a maintenance contract yet, you're evaluating, we encourage you to use this to submit a request. If you come to, you're going to see my my agent's view, so you'll see the wrong view here in a second. Let me go back, actually. That's going to hang us up. I've got too many pages open. So, but this is a place you'll come to submit a request for support. Now I'm back to the main page. Support portal. The other section so I won't show you that page because it'll take too long, but it's a simple matter of submitting the request, and you have to be logged in. That comes to the support team. We have a whole triage system of dealing with that. That's the fastest way to get an answer from Gurobi, whether you're evaluating or you have a maintenance contract. The most important thing I wanted to show you here is the knowledge base. There are lots of questions asked here that we're sort of asking rhetorically and answering ourselves. And I think these are really good content because they're based on experiences we've had in talking to customers, and we contribute to this on a regular basis. The support team really works to build this up. And so there are a lot of good bits of information in here, and you can search the whole thing. Both the knowledge base and the community, which I'll show you in a moment, are supported by this search dialog. We could just search for infeasibility and we'll get knowledge base articles and community articles. So then I'll show you the community. It's the same idea, only the community is further down here. The community contains questions asked by you, by customers. So this is more of an open forum that's answered by support and by the developer team. They like to pay attention to this. And you can submit a new post, and then they're categorized somewhat arbitrarily. There are only so many groupings we want to list. So don't be shy about poking around. It's sometimes useful to just browse around and see what's there. Okay, so that's the support portal. Now, let's talk about Python for a moment. I talked about getting started with Python, with modeling, actually, but this is more Python specific. I did get a bit confused on that first slide. This is Python specific. The first slide is more generic. I think it's written for Python, but it's meant to be more generic, and anyone who is interested in modeling could watch those. These tutorials at the bottom of this page are specific to Python programmers. It just describes the API that Gurobi provides for Python. And the interesting thing, I think, is that no matter what solver you're using, Python, if you're using Python, it's good to learn that solver's API. It's because all these solvers tend to have the similar APIs, so it's not very hard to switch between solvers. So in my opinion, the best way to use a solver from Python is to learn that solver's API, and that's what this section's about. So I'll show you how to, I'll show you the documentation on how to set up Python or Gurobi into Python, into your Python interface, and then these modeling tutorials. Let's have a look at that. So we'll go to the Gurobi main page. And so in the quick start guide, the setup for Python is available from the same set of links I showed you previously, the language specific links. So the Python interface page starts by telling me how to install into Python. Here it is. We prefer Anaconda because it includes some really useful tools, but Gurobi works just as well in other Python installations, more generic ones. So that's a Python interface. You can get it going pretty easily, I think. I think it's an easy thing to do. But then under the resources menu, we can go back to videos. Seminars and videos. I showed you the wrong links earlier, but I showed you the Python links before. If I look for Python, as I said, Python 1, 2, and 3 are great places, really good videos. And as I said, these are 1 hour, and the last one is 20 minutes duration. I'll show you actually the one I missed before. There is a modeling section here, and you can search the page. The links are in the the links, they're getting started with modeling links in the presentation. I'll refer back to those. So I've got myself a bit off course here. But so that covers modeling with Python. And so now you've got quite a bit of time invested. But when you sit down to write a model, I think next to the reference information, I think the most important tool that we can provide to you are these examples. We have product examples that are installed in the example subdirectory under, for instance, in Linux, it's Gurobi 811 Linux 64 examples. In the top level directory under examples, I'm showing at the right here for Linux first and then Windows on the right. So you can see they're very similar. Mac is much the same. And then, so these include API examples, what I'm calling building block examples that are sort of real world models, but very small and simple. So you can use them as a starting point if it's similar to the model you're trying to build. Also, don't miss this build directory. I'm pointing at it now with the arrow there. It looks like the examples build directory shown on the right and on the bottom for Linux. The top one is Windows. So these contain build scripts or projects, solutions for Visual Studio, and these will help you get started in whatever language you're working in. For Linux, it's almost all in the make file, if you look at the bottom right here. And there's an example tour I'll show you in a moment. Let's go look at some examples. So actually, I'll go to an editor at this point. This is an editor that I use for my programming for Python. It's just a text editor, it's nothing special. But I've got it open to the Gurobi Python folder, the examples that contain Python. They're all listed at the far right of the screen behind you in this slide. Actually, I'll get that out of the way for a moment so we can see. But the samples, as you can see here, are all pretty simple. This is only 100 lines of code. It's just showing how to program with Gurobi. We try to keep them simple, so most of them declare the data statically. There is one in here that lets you declare the data for a database using Python tools. There's similar programs in each of the APIs. So this one's really a kind of a academic example that's kind of a classic academic optimization problem. This one is more of a building block type of example. If you look at the lower right, there are 5 of these, and it's showing you how to build a workforce assignment application, workforce scheduling. Then there are API specific ones like this sos.py it's just there to show you how to use SOS constraints and nothing else. It's not really a real world example. It's just contrived to show the use of this SOS constraint call. So those are the 3 main groupings of model types. So I'll come back and show you the example tour in a moment. But we also have some other kinds of examples. And also, by the way, the examples I just showed you, there are 2 ways of looking at them online. There's an example tour that's very descriptive. There's sort of an index page for the examples that I'll show you. There are modeling examples that are a different group, a little more full-featured, and they're on our website. And then there's a brand new modeling library from Gurobi on GitHub. I'll show you that. Then I'll also show you the demos page. These are optimization application demos that Gurobi has recently built. I'll show it to you briefly, but there's a complete video explaining these and explaining all the capabilities and features that you can get from them. So let's take a look at those now. I'll go back to the top level page. I might close these other tabs to speed things up. And from the top level page, we'll go to the product samples. And you get there through documentation. Example tour is one way in there. So let's start with that. It's available 2 places. Go to the example tour. And this gives you a real descriptive way of looking at each of these examples. And within that, you get a sort of a grouped list. There's also an index list available as well, and the link is in the slides, but I'll just jump there. These are the same product examples grouped by category and sort of described in very terse ways, but with a link to each of the languages. So you can quickly find what you want to do and then go to that particular example. Okay, so those are different ways of looking at the product examples, but then we have these slightly more feature-rich examples that are more instructive, I think, almost like a tutorial. They're specific to different kinds of problems, as you can see here. Not a lot of them, but if one of these is close to what you're doing, it's really a rich way, a really strong attempt to teach you all the ins and outs of the model. So it's got a basic description and then a more detailed description, sort of verbal description, then a mathematical formulation, and then the Python code. Yep, so all on one page, and these are good examples, I think, if they're close to what you're trying to do. Then we have a GitHub page, or a GitHub repository for Gurobi. Hopefully, I believe it will grow with time, but currently it contains our modeling examples. Right now there are 2 of these, but we're adding them pretty quickly. I think you'll see more of these in the very near future. These are meant to be more like a real world problem. So they all include a Jupyter notebook. That's what this file is. And sometimes GitHub will let the Jupyter notebook, and it worked this time, load on within my web page. Sometimes it doesn't. So usually, let me explain that. Usually you want to link, or just download that Jupyter page, and you can use it locally if you have Anaconda installed or Jupyter. But it has a description as well. But within the description, you get code, and this is executable code. That's what's cool about it if you're running it as a Jupyter notebook. So it lets you sort of play with it. You can edit this if you're in a Jupyter notebook, edit things, change the code itself, and sort of, it's a great incremental way to learn how a particular model works. But these are more feature rich. They're more like a real world scenario, a real world application. Very much worth studying if they're close to what you're trying to do. And then the last thing are the demos that Gurobi offers, the optimization application demos. They're at demos.gurobi.com. And it defaults to the cutting stock demo when you start, but there's a menu here in the upper right. Currently we have 3 demos. So I think you'll see this list grow as well. So there's a workforce assignment demo, resource matching demo, and you just saw the cutting stock. These are full-featured, currently mostly simple examples, but they will become more feature-rich examples, more like a real-world application problem, fully described in the model and in the architecture. This is meant to be a very scalable architecture, and so it's implied as a best practice that you might follow if you want to start from scratch on building your own user interface and web infrastructure to support an optimization application. And so the last subject we wanted to cover today is performance. If you've got your model working, that's great. I don't know what percentage, I'm kind of curious. Once it's working though, a significant percentage of you will want to speed it up. And that's the way I approach it. I just get the model working and then worry about performance later. Because a lot of times it'll be good enough for your purposes. It'll be fast enough. And I don't have to worry about performance. We'll just run the model and put it into production. but a significant percentage of the time, the first draft of the model isn't performant, and you want to learn ways to speed it up. And another thing, of course, is as a model gets older, you're adding constraints and maybe the data sets are growing. This is a really common scenario for every production application. And so the performance becomes an issue usually later on too. So the first thing we'll show you are these videos. This is the richest set of resources that I can show you. This is really fantastic, and I'll show you these videos. There are also solver logs. Every time you solve a problem with Gurobi, you get a big log like the one at the right here, and it's a pretty dense bunch of information. So we have a reference page on how to read these logs. I'll show you that. Then we have a tuning tool called GRB Tune. You can use yourself, or we can do it for you in support. It's part of your support agreement. So I'll describe how to use that and how to submit a model to us if you want us to do the tuning for you, which we'll be glad to do. That's true whether you're a commercial customer on a maintenance agreement or you're doing an evaluation. Both of those scenarios are supported with this service. So let's look at the web pages and the tools. So under resources on the main Gurobi web page, we have the seminars and videos, and we'll just look for performance. And so we have first this one, better solutions through effective parameter settings. This is a great webinar, includes a lot of tips. It's probably the oldest of the three, but we've left it up there because it does include tips that the other two videos don't include. And so it's a good one to work with. The place to start, I think, is this one, which I'll show you in a moment. And I believe this is the newest one. It's how to improve the performance of the Gurobi Optimizer. And it includes tips and secrets from people who have taken years to learn performance. And it's just really like a professional consultant in a video. It's really valuable. I recommend it highly. It's just a great video to watch. And a similar one is Introduction to Performance Tuning. I'll show you that. Very similar to the first one, and there is a lot of overlap, but there's enough that's not covered by the other two videos that it's worth watching as well. So these three videos, when you have performance issues, great to watch. You can watch them for a bit, pause them, and then do things with your own model to try to improve performance and see if it works. It's really a great way to learn the tricks of the trade. Right, the one thing that you will need sooner or later if you're worried about performance is this logging page. For whatever reason, I find it kind of hard to find, myself anyway. So, but the link is in the slides, which you'll get later. And so I've jumped to it here, and there is a separate section for each type of algorithm. And sometimes for multi-objective and distributed MEP also, there's special logs that you'll want to understand. Let's take a look here at the MIP log. It's probably the richest log that Gurobi outputs, and it takes some time to understand it. And it's all described here. Each of these columns with the terse column headings we have described very carefully down below it. So it's well worth looking at. You might just remember this is here, and then when you need it later, you'll be able to find it. I'll jump to another video. And so we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about tuning. So there is a video about how to use the tuning tool. There's documentation in the resource and documentation link as well, but this is a quick way to learn how to use it. But it's really quite simple. So let me show you a quick tuning session. It's called GRB Tune. Let's clear that. And so here I've just run a tuning session on a real small model. It's super fast. Sometimes this could take days. When we do tuning for you, I've left them running for weeks, actually, more than a week. But so you can let the Gurobi tool find the best set of parameters for you. This one's told me that I should use a parameter method 1, and that'll get me the best performance. Sometimes it doesn't find an improvement over the defaults, and it'll tell you that. But it does the tests in a way that is more resilient. Let me clear the background so we can see what's going on here. More resilient than if you just ran the test one time, you get a very sort of overtuned result. So what this does is it varies a seed value, and that somewhat emulates the change of if you change your data or change your operating system or run on a different hardware, different computer, you can get different results. The parameter set that's best for one computer or one operating system will be different from another. And to avoid those sort of over-tuning situations, we use seed values, a variation of those in the tuning tool to mimic the changes of the operating system. So you get parameter recommendations that will be more resilient as you change different aspects of the model, even just the data. Now, when you've done that, you'll want to submit the model to Gurobi. There is a description of all this process here. Let's show you that, how to submit a model. So just remember that this knowledge base article exists, and when you're ready to do it, it tells you how to upload a model. But we have a website interface. You can FTP it. It goes to the same place. But it's Java based, so it takes a moment to load. And I can submit some information here and submit my model. And it goes to a very secure file store that only specific people in Gurobi have access to and are trained so that your intellectual property will be protected. So that is the presentation.